Good evening and welcome to BHA Live. I'm Trevor Brugger and I will be your host of tonight's installation of our ongoing series of Friday night educational experiences. We're thrilled that they've become so popular. I'm very excited to see so many of you joining us tonight for what I'm sure will be a great presentation from two of Australia's best known barbershop quartetters. However, before we begin, I think it is important to take a bit of time to recognise the tragic events occurring around the world and the impact this is having on our barbershop brothers and sisters in the United States, particularly, but also all around the world, including here at home. If any good can come from this experience, may it be that we all learn to listen, to learn, and to support each other to truly live in harmony. But for now, on with the show. If this is your first session, welcome. Make sure you check out what you have missed on the YouTube channel. If you've been to one of our sessions before, then welcome back. Pour yourself a drink and enjoy. During this session, you'll be able to interact with each other using the chat function on the side of your screen. You'll be able to ask the presenter questions by using the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen. It's important to know that they can't see the chat screen while presenting, so use the Q&A feature if you want them to answer you. Now, our first presenter tonight is well known as one of Australia's most successful quartet singers. He's won more national quartet contests than you can poke a stick at. Mind you, he's also won plenty of chorus contests too. He's well known for his comedy performances in such groups as Four to the Bar, your 1997 champs, Alliance, your 3 times national champs, and of course, the Electric Barbercats. He's a coach, a music director, a qualified performance category judge, and of course, the current president of our national association. He's been doing this stuff for more than 30 years, and I can't wait to hear from him tonight. Our second presenter, of course, needs no introduction. Okay, so he does. Our second presenter is just as well known on the Australian barbershop scene, coming from a musical family with both parents, both sisters, a brother-in-law and a niece, all heavily into barbershop. He was doomed from the start. He's also a multi-gold medal winner with TLA in 2013, Lockout in 2015 and 2017, and many times with his chorus, Vocal Evolution, where he is currently the musical director. He's also a qualified performance category judge, coach extraordinaire, and the deputy assistant vice co-host, that's a mouthful, of the popular podcast series, Good Morning BHA. He's the current lead singer of the Electric Barbercats, and you'll not be surprised to hear that not so long ago, these two Muppets got away with performing Your Mum joke in the capacity crowd of the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, to a standing ovation. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's special guests, Mr. Dan Millgate and Ash Schofield.
Well, hello and welcome. How excited we are to be here with you. Look, this session is all about using barbershop in your performances and how it applies to barbershop. I said comedy, not barbershop, didn't I?
No.
No? Okay, we're good. Okay, let's read this script again. Who wrote this? This session is all about using comedy in your performance and how it applies to barbershop.
That's right, Dan. But if you've jumped online tonight expecting to leave as a masterful comedy writer or world-famous comedian, you might need to check your expectations.
That's right, because there are no rules, and funny can be very, very subjective.
But over the next hour together, we hope to give you some top tips from some of the best people in the business, and also some terrible tips from some of the unfunniest people in the business, in order to give you some ideas to think about when trying out comedy live on stage.
So, let's get started.
What is?
I don't know how they got there.
Come on, man. Get out of here.
Okay. You know, Ash, the writer E.B. White once said, humour can be dissected as a frog can. but the thing dies in the process. And the innards are discouraging to anyone but the pure scientific mind.
I must have a pure scientific mind, because I really like dissecting why something is funny. But I'm not sure why we have to kill a frog.
Oh. Okay, first of all, let's talk about comedy. What is it? What makes something funny? What makes a group good at comedy?
Comedy isn't a science, it's art. And tonight, what did title? Oh my goodness.
Hang on, what?
What are these slides, man?
Sorry, hang on, I don't know what this one is all about.
That's all right. Look, comedy looks like it's got some levels in it.
Yeah. This is definitely about the levels of comedy.
Good. You've gone to quite a bit of effort to establish the mood of this presentation. I really like it.
Thanks, I'm trying very hard. Okay. All right. So, one thing worth noting is that when analysing comedy and what is funny, it's always like it's only visible out of the corner of your eye. As soon as you try and look at it directly and analyse it too much, all the funniness can disappear. This is demonstrated on this slide here.
Wait, I think I see what this means. Yep. So this that is like wow, and this one's very interesting. Yeah,
correct.
That makes sense.
Correct. Although I do find it very, very hard to swallow the results of that fourth graph. I find that is highly unlikely.
That is a joke. So this is going well.
I think so.
Why do we find things funny? What occurs to us when we see something and need to make that laughy noise? Simply put, there is no simple answer. I just said that.
I'm trying.
Unsimple?
So, what?
That's not even a word.
I'm sorry. What?
Okay.
Hey, people of all ages and cultures respond to humour. Most people are able to experience humour, to be amused, to smile, or laugh at something funny, such as a pun or a joke, and thus are considered to have a sense of humour. Though ultimately decided by personal taste, the extent to which a person finds something humorous depends on a host of variables, including geographical location, culture, maturity, their level of education, their intelligence, and context. For example, young children may favour slapstick humour, such as itchy and scratchy cartoons. In the stage performance genre that we're discussing tonight, though, a contrasting, more sophisticated form of humour, such as parody, requires an understanding of its social meaning and context, and thus tends to appeal to a more mature audience.
There are some basic ingredients or forms that make up this thing we call humour. Humour can be verbal, visual, or physical. Non-verbal forms of communication, for example, musical or visual art, can also be humorous.
Something can be funny because it captures a moment or contains an element of simple truth or reality. It's something that you've known about for a long time, and yet you're hearing it out loud for the first time. So we laugh. This is called observational comedy, and it's probably one of the main types of humour used in stand-up comedy by well-known comedians like Jim Owen, Carl Barron, Jerry Seinfeld, and Robin Williams. The humour is based on the premise of, hey, have you ever noticed?
Sometimes the need to feel intelligent comes into play in finding things funny. If someone tries putting their shoes on while standing up and falls over, they look foolish. And therefore, it makes us feel intelligent because it isn't us. So we laugh. If someone makes a clever joke and only a few people get it, we recognize that person as being clever. And we feel clever ourselves because we understand the joke. So we laugh. But comedy is not always to do with self-congratulations and feeling intelligent. Sometimes the element of surprise, or the art of misdirection, or logical contradictions, or unintended meanings can be very funny.
That's right, Ash. And sometimes stuff can be funny because expected. Here's an example. A lady saves up for ages and buys a white coat that she's always wanted. She tells the shopkeeper she's dreamed of wearing this coat for months and has been saving up. The shopkeeper says, whoa, this is the last coat in stock. We see the woman's gleeful face as she tries on her new lovely white coat. We cut away to a scene of a park keeper painting a bench black. Oh, and let's really overstate it. Let's make sure he's painting the bench black next door to a zebra enclosure in a zoo. We already know what's going to happen, right? The comedy is in the anticipation and the expectation as we build up to the inevitable moment where she sits on a wet black bench in her new white coat and ends up with black stripes all over her back. Here's another example of a comedy that you can predict. Where's the play button, Ash? It should play, shouldn't it? There it is.
How you doing over there? Really good. Okay.
Did your son know anything about carpentry?
No, not a. Did I hear a drill?
Dale!
Power tools.
Dale, no power tools!
Oh, what?
No power tools!
You know what? I forgot I have to brush my teeth.
That is not your toothbrush!
Oh, okay. Well, I'm all done anyway. We did it. We did it. It looked amazing. Look at that. That looks like what you would buy from a store. It should have been. Look at all this floor space. So much aerobics in here. So many activities. Do step class. It's making my head spin how many activities we can do. Play army man. Yeah. This is how we do it. Da, 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 da. Hey, I never asked you. Yeah. You like guacamole? Oh! Oh God! Run! Run!
Sometimes funny happens because it is unexpected. Let's go for a twist. So that same lady from earlier buys her white coat and approaches the wet black bench. Look out, yells the zookeeper. Oh, thanks, says the woman. I almost sat on that. Then an escaped lion leaps in from the side and mauls her. Here's another example of a bit of unexpected comedy that literally comes out of the blue.
Old MacDonald had a deformed farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on this farm he had an octopelagic octopus. E-I-E-I-O with a...
Sometimes funny is because it's something familiar. For example, a guy places a tin of baked beans in his shopping trolley and turns to fetch another one. While he's not looking, his trolley rolls away sideways. We laugh, a knowing laugh, because we recognise the age-old problem of shopping trolleys rolling sideways. Or something else, what could be more familiar than a baby crying? We all know that sound, but what happens if you use that familiarity with a more comedic intent?
The stage is a cool place, and it never gets old. Camps and shows and going for gold, and our personalities differ, like when Joey does this.
Oh.
Whoa, hang on, Joey. Dude, is that real?
That's a real thing that I can do.
Well, how'd you learn to do that?
I've been able to do that since I was born.
Sometimes something can be funny because it is unfamiliar. So maybe that same trolley guy that Dan was talking about earlier places a tin in his trolley and turns to fetch another tin. While he's not looking, his trolley explodes.
Your anecdotes are really weak.
We laugh, a shock laugh, because we didn't expect that. Sometimes, too, a familiar pattern can be broken for comedic effect. Something you are very familiar with is changed deliberately for comedic purposes. Check this out.
You're not at all worried that something might happen to him?
No, for 3 reasons. A, I'm not that lucky. 2, we have smoke detectors. And D, we live in the most boring street in the United States of America, where nothing even remotely dangerous will ever happen. Period.
That's good. So there's a few reasons why something can be funny. And of course, there are many, many types of comedy. Before you try to be funny, though, it's absolutely vital that you understand the many ways that comedy can be effective. If you don't understand how a car works, you are highly likely going to crash that car. So it's important that you have an excellent awareness of what kind of vehicle you are relying on to add comedy to a performance, and that you understand how to drive it, or else you are going to crash and burn.
Here's a few more ideas about the many different vehicles that can be effective to get a joke from point A to point 2 to point D. Including slapstick comedy. It involves the exaggerated physical activity that exceeds the boundaries of usual physical comedy, a technique you'd all be familiar with, I'm sure. Joe picks up a large plank. Fred behind him says, "Hey Joe, careful with that plank." Joe turns around saying, "What?" and whacks Fred in the face with the plank. Hilarious.
Here's a great example of a slapstick performance. Watch out for all of the different physical interactions in this brilliantly crafted piece.
Okay, well, have fun.
Dream of now, dream of then, dream of a love song that might have been. Do I love you? Oh yes, I love you, and I'll bravely tell you, but only when we dream again. Sweet and low, sweet and low, how sweet the memory, how long ago, forever, oh yes, forever, will I ever tell you, oh no.
So much stuff. Okay, so next, parody is where a work deliberately mimics the style of another for comic effect or ridicule. It's one of my favourite forms of comedy. I just love to really let it go. Okay, too soon. Think of Weird Al Yankovic singing songs like a Surgeon or Eat It, or these guys doing this.
Drives me insane when you say my name wrong. And girl, you're really gonna hate this song. This song. Jackson. Guys, you know my name is actually pronounced
Josh, it disturbs me to see you, Jackson, looking so down in the dumps.
announce now every voice he'd love to be you, Jackson. Even our friend Donald Duck.
I thought you were gonna say Donald Trump.
Trust us, there's no one admired as you. You're everyone's 10th favorite lead.
But we were 9th.
If everyone's awed and inspired by me, then I hope
You three will
show me why.
We're going to show you why. You just have
To see it.
through our eyes.
He's casting a spell.
I'm starting to see it now.
No one's slick as Jackson, no one's quick as Jackson. Vocal cords as incredibly thick as Jackson. For there's no pipes as electrifying. Yes, your idea's perfect, of your stuff.
Hey, thanks, guys.
You can ask any Joe, Jake, or Ryan, and he'll tell you he's surely a son of a rich set of parents who could afford quality voice lessons. That was
Good times.
Good times. Another one is spoof. Spoof is light parody or gentle imitation. It is not necessarily intended to ridicule or make fun of the thing spoofed, but the comedy happens in the recognition of the piece being spoofed. I said spoofed many times.
You sure did.
For instance, a librarian in glasses with tied-up hair, who is obviously beautiful anyway, takes off her glasses and unties her hair and shakes it loose. As she does, her wig falls off. We all recognize the Hollywood moment that was meant to happen, and so this is funny not just because her wig falls off, but because we are fully aware of the reference and we know that usually this is not supposed to happen.
Satire is where a section of society, religion, or politics is deliberately mimicked and mocked in order to poke fun at them. Good examples of this include like the Broadway show, The Book of Mormon, the British TV series Yes Minister, big shout out to Richard Reeve for that one. US TV series like Spin City, The West Wing, or Veep. And in Australia, we've got some really good examples like Front and The Hollow Men or Utopia.
Series?
I think that's a thing. That's a word now.
Another one is irony. This is where the opposite of what is expected happens, or when someone says the opposite of what they mean. It's about the lack of harmony between something that is expected and the reality. So if you change jobs from being a garbage man to working in a bank, but then got paid less to work in the bank, then some would point out a certain irony in your situation. I might add that irony is not anything to do with 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. Just saying.
Fair. Sarcasm is where an insult or a quick remark is fired at someone with the intention of causing injury. It's often used in response to an initial statement or comment in order to pour scorn on the stated idea or statement. And sarcasm often features irony. For instance, if someone drops a tray and someone else shouts, "Oh, that was so clever." Unfortunately, though, I am completely unfamiliar with sarcasm. So let's move on.
Farce, my favourites, is where comedy is achieved through exaggeration and extreme characters in preposterous circumstances.
That's easy for you to say.
That seem to spiral out of control and become ever more ludicrous. Examples include Fawlty Towers, The Pink Panther, or the classic movies Airplane and Airplane 2.
And Airplane 2.
It was at that moment that I first realized Elaine had doubts about our relationship. And that, as much as anything else, led to my drinking problem. We did come back to the States, tried a number of jobs. Well, I could go on for
how
hours.
about this one?
They're coming! Hang on, I'm gonna floor it! Watch out! Move! Move! Move!
Careful, Austin.
Watch out! Watch out! Watch out!
Another method that I frequently get in trouble for using is black comedy. This is where a light humour touch is applied to a very dark and serious subject matter in order to ease the pain and make some specific point by juxtaposing the humour and the sadness. An example of this involves the famous author and playwright Oscar Wilde. He was destitute and living in a cheap hotel when he found himself on his deathbed. His last words are reported to be, "Either that wallpaper goes or I do." Another famous example comes from Monty Python's Life of Brian, where the crucified prisoners sing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life" as they then die. Speaking of Monty Python, though, they were well known as a group that made use of another great technique called surrealism, which involves throwing together completely disjointed concepts and random ideas to weave together something quite bizarre. Think of things like the killer bunny rabbit, or having to correctly answer a quiz about your favourite colour, or the weight of an unladen swallow to pass over a bridge.
Timing! Great. Just like,
I think that worked. I think it worked.
did you get that, everyone? Timing is probably the most mysterious part of performance comedy. In any performance comedy, a rhythm is established, and people often talk about beats. A beat is a small pause put in place to enhance a joke, sometime after the punchline, to enable the audience time to react and get the joke. But often a pause is placed before a line to build expectation. It can also be used to throw in a double punchline. The punchline is delivered, the audience laughs, there's a pause, then the second punchline follows on, which the audience was not expecting. These beats are often called pregnant pauses, and they are full of expectations. Check out this fun example of timing, beats, and pregnant pauses.
Just an old-time song that we love to sing in that good old barbershop style. Good old style.
I love that so much. See how even silence can be funny if the timing is good. So anyway, another technique is called misunderstanding. Imagine old mate Joe holding a large nail on a wall. Fred's holding a large hammer. Joe says, "When I nod my head, you hit it." Joe nods. So Fred hits Joe over the head with the hammer. never gets unfunny.
Puns and wordplay are always good fun. An example is this, probably the second oldest joke after the chicken/road effort. My dog's got no nose.
How does he smell?
Just awful. Here's a group that took their knowledge of G-rated Disneyland puns and made it a comedic feature for their performances.
Coney Island, watch for around.
Hey! There you go. Where does Captain Hook go to get a new hook?
Where?
The second-hand store.
See her on the boardwalk every...
Hey!
What?
Why did Cinderella get kicked off the soccer team?
Why?
She kept running away from the ball.
Soap suds all around, bubbles on the ground. Rub it up to 3 minutes, a bowl of tune she's found. Thimbles on her fingers make some...
Hey!
What?
Why does Goofy wear 2 pairs of pants to go golfing?
Why?
In case he gets a hole in one.
Disgraceful, it really is. Hey, Ash, did you know that Double Entendre was an excellent champion mixed harmony quartet in 2015?
No, I did not. But I do know that double entendre is also another technique used in comedy. This is where a particular figure of speech or way of wording things is designed to be understood in two ways, having a double meaning. The innuendo may convey a message that is too suggestive or offensive to state directly.
Hey, Ash, is it very hard?
This page intentionally left blank.
That was for all of the applause after that joke.
Stereotypes. These work because we immediately recognize the character, and so we are familiar with what sort of person this is without too much information needing to be given. The problem is that they very quickly become old and repetitive, and so you have to try and spot new stereotypes or add a twist to an old one to avoid the joke looking tired.
The characteristic swap is when you attribute human characteristics to animals or objects and attribute animal object qualities to humans. A simple example might be a man who argues with his pitch pipe, accusing it of deliberately going sharp during his last song. And yes, we're looking at you, Ian Mulholland.
Another technique is to use everyday objects used for other purposes, or have people assuming roles they would not usually occupy. This out-of-context humour can be very effective. Think of someone trying to hold up a bank using a banana, or a hospital cleaner called in to help with brain surgery.
The infectious wisdom of the fool method is when a wrong opinion is expressed and then it catches on with others. In this type of a situation, a wise person will say something and a fool will hear it and misinterpret it loudly. A second fool then hears that misinterpretation and agrees with it. And so the wise person then has to race around connecting it to prevent the foolishness from spreading further.
My word. Another one is the flawed plan. This can be demonstrated by a character discussing a plan, but it is obvious to the audience that one glaring aspect of the plan is doomed to fail. This can be due to information the audience has been told elsewhere, or it can simply be that the character is overlooking something blatantly obvious. Think Weekend at Bernie's. We all knew that plan wouldn't work, right?
Right. So these are just a few of the different vehicles that can be used to get some solid lols. And just as some people find certain things funnier than others, so too do the audiences that we perform for often react differently to different things. But the million-dollar question I'm hearing you ask your screen right now is, how does all of this translate to barbershop performances?
I am sure some of you would have had a joke together at a rehearsal that seemed hilarious, and you thought it would be a great idea to take that out on stage. Then, big surprise, the audience didn't find it funny. It's subjective, granted, but maybe it was also because you didn't fully understand a few important things about the way comedy works, the different vehicles you can use, and the needs of the audience as much as you thought you did. When designing a comedy performance in the barbershop world, just waiting for Chuck to come up to the screen. No, I was excited. When designing a comedy performance in the barbershop world, you are going to find it super helpful to have an understanding of the contest and judging context. In barbershop, the performance category evaluates how the artist communicates a message and vision via the transformation of a song into an entertaining experience for the audience.
And that's how that transformation happens. Listen up, because this is quite important. The performance of the song is the artist's gift to the audience, whose experiences, memories, and imagination transform that gift into an emotional experience. It's very important then to make sure that your gift to the audience isn't one that they want to refund as soon as they possibly can. Understanding and using the correct vehicles to deliver your gift, making sure you deliver the gift properly, making sure that the audience wants your gift and that there's somebody home to receive your gift, that is the goal.
Yeah, from a judging point of view, there are a few simple factors that performance category judge to evaluate the effectiveness of your performance. Words. Your gift, and this performance includes any comedy that you try. Factor number 1 is creativity. Within the bounds of good taste, great freedom is permitted. After all, a good performance is a good performance. Artistry and expressiveness are equally important considerations, as is considering if your performance is coming from the heart and is believable. And most importantly to us, audience rapport. This is the degree to which the audience is entertained and the degree to which they are receptive to your performance. As a high-intensity participation sport, if you can't engage and entertain your audience, you will fail. The good news is that we know that. Barbershop, sorry.
Close.
The good news is that we know that barbershop audiences love to laugh, and the rush of having a huge comedic hit has driven many barbershop performances to include comedic elements in their performance. So, some great news. The BHS Contest and Judging Secret Headquarters has developed secret advice for us as performers in the barbershop style. This is secretly known as the super impressive sounding and definitely top secret Position Paper X Chapter 9. We will now wiki barber leak this to you.
Jeff, I've got big gates. The position paper advice is that while different things are found amusing by different people, most successful comedic barbershop performances exhibit hallmarks of good comedic concepts and technique. Now, we've already talked about a lot of these techniques, and it's important to know that they're being formally adjudicated. But here's the main tip that we could offer you. A judge wants you to succeed. The judge wants nothing more than to look down at the end of your performance and realise there's nothing written on the score sheet. They've been so absorbed in your performance that they just plumb forgot to judge. The performance judge will evaluate your concepts and techniques and their resulting comedic effect as part of the overall entertainment value of the performance. But remember, the judge is nothing more than an audience member who happens to have a pen in their hand. So stick to the basic concept of designing your performances to entertain.
One thing that is being looked at is the comic premise contained in your performance. Comic situations arise from the juxtaposition of a ridiculous character in a normal world, or vice versa. The comic premise is the gap between comic reality and real-world reality. In barbershop performances, we often see a quartet with 3 seemingly normal characters trying to soldier on despite the antics of the 4th one, usually the goofball standing on the end. Other examples of a strong comic premise include fish out of water situations, such as hillbillies arriving in the big city or aliens coming to Earth to sing in a quartet contest.
Nobody calls me Mad Dog, especially not some duded up, egg-sucking gutter trash.
Shit. Another area being adjudicated is characterization. The strength of a comic premise often depends on the audience being able to easily recognize the characters and personalities being portrayed by the performers. Barbershop performances and other low forms of comedy often use easily recognizable stock characters like the nerd, the jock, the yokel, and so on. Once the audience has an expectation of how a character might behave, comedy can be derived by delivering the unexpected. In a 2-song performance, there's very little time to convey character traits, but suitable costuming, brief spoken words, or stereotypical gestures can often do the trick.
If your festivities include a soiree, you ought to give it easy easiest way. But besides the caviar and chocolate souffle, you better have me there. The life of the party, oh no, you wouldn't want it getting very dull, becoming one uninterrupted lull. So why not have the guarantee? The fun's about to begin when I come staggering.
The rule of three. This one's awesome. When presented with information, humans intuitively search for patterns. It helps us learn, remember, and understand. Comedy is derived from delivering the unexpected. So comedy writers set up their gags in three parts, because three is the smallest number required to establish a pattern. The first two phrases, or looks or gestures, are generally consistent with each other, which sets up an expectation for the next one. The third one takes a left turn, and that surprise creates the laugh. It's as easy as A to D. Oh, I see what you did there.
Well, I see a certain kitten still knows how to scratch.
We'll start with the blue. There we go.
It says here, sir, to ignore the red wire, sir.
Right, thank you. Now I think it's one or other of these pretty green ones. This one, I think.
Looks like we may be here for the duration, sir.
Yes.
Sort this. Anyone fancy a pint?
So good. Timing is the secret of great comedy. Pace and delivery affects the success of a joke. A fast pace can improve some gags, but ruin others. And the skillful use of beats can be a source of comedy in itself. Remember, the beat is a pause used to allow the audience to absorb and process the action, or to create tension and expectation before a punchline. Jack Benny and Victor Borger are famous for using the extended beat. And in the barbershop world, the quartet Fred that you just saw also made really good use of that technique. Watch this next clip. Not only is George's pace and timing while telling his story masterful, but look out for Kramer's really skillful beat at the end. Oh, curtains, who curtains?
Oh, curtains are wonderful.
They're quite a treat.
George, I've just been reading this thing in the paper. It's unbelievable.
I know, I was just telling them the story.
Well, come on, George, finish the story.
The sea was angry that day, my friends. Like an old man trying to send back soup in a deli. I got about 50 feet out, and suddenly, the great beast appeared before me. I tell you, he was 10 stories high if he was a foot. As if sensing my presence, he let out a great bellow. I said, "Easy, big fella." And then, as I watched him struggling, I realized that something was obstructing its breathing. From where I was standing, I could see directly into the eye of the great fish.
Mammal.
Whatever.
Hey, what did you do next?
Well, then, from out of nowhere, a huge tidal wave lifted me, tossed me like a cork, and I found myself right on top of him, face to face with the blowhole. I could barely see from the waves crashing down upon me, but I knew something was there. So I reached my hand in, felt around, and pulled out the obstruction.
What is that, a Titleist? A hole in one, huh?
found out. That was cool.
That's good.
Setups and punchlines. They can be sung, spoken, or acted out physically. In any case, for a comedic moment to be successful, there has to be a clear and clean communication. And there are several ways to accomplish this. Excellent enunciation of song lyrics, especially if they are parody lyrics that the audience has not heard before, is essential. Too many lyrics too quickly is a waste of time. Successful sight gags usually feature crisp gestures and movements, i.e. the visual equivalent of excellent enunciation. If the audience can't see it, they can't react to it.
That's true.
Punchlines, whether spoken or sung, are often best constructed with the funniest word of the punchline at or near the end. Also, a contrast between setup and punchline heightens the surprise. An intensely delivered setup followed by a deadpan punchline, or vice versa, is a common device. Once again, skillful comic performers use beats and allow brief amounts of space in between looks or gestures. All the better to allow the audience to absorb and understand the action.
That's good. Big video.
Da 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 da. The light shines bright on your bald head tonight, night follicle to be seen. A scene of real desolation, and you look like Mr. Sheen. Clean, clean, your head's reflections really hard to stand beside. Couldn't keep it in, heaven knows we've tried. Oh, it's on your chin, but we can see a 9-inch part where your hair used to be. It's smooth to feel, don't need a comb, a real chrome dome. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? You don't need a comb anymore.
That's the stuff. That's some great stuff right there. So, to be honest with you, the X-Files position paper is really quite plain. That's what it's called, right? X-Files? Yeah. It's really quite plain and simple. And it's really helpful as a performer to know exactly what kind of things are being looked at. Remember to keep this stuff in mind when you're constructing a comedy performance, and you'll go a really long way. And that, my friends, is an excellent segue, because we had to go a very long way to ask a few of our favourite performers if they had any tips or tricks that we could let you in on, especially for this presentation. Eddie Holt of the famous Lunch Break Quartet is well known as a great performer and coach of comedy, and has been responsible for some of Barbershop's most hilarious moments. We asked Eddie what his top tips or bits of advice would be for anyone considering performing comedy. Eddie's advice was, it's a handful of different truths that individually aren't funny, but when combined are either really funny or not funny at all. That's good. Tip number 1 is to do what other funny groups do, that makes a lot of sense. But importantly, tip number 2 is to publicly admit that you're not as good as they were.
Tip number 3 is to find the dumb one in the quartet, then state the obvious.
Really?
Number 4 is to try and sing what the audience is thinking. There's nothing better than an audience anticipating a punchline. Tip number 5, Eddie says, you know that insecurity you're hanging on to? Just come out and say it, because everyone is thinking it. Being vulnerable is always good to watch as an audience member.
Tip number 6 is to not dive so far into musical theatre and play someone else's comedic role that you forget who you are in all this mess. Number 7, now Eddie calls this one the ratchet. The human condition is to accumulate cultural information and modify it over time to grow and gain complexity. So sing about that. Number 9 is to remember. There's no number 8. Okay. No, okay, that's deliberate. Number 9 is to remember that every performance is just a rehearsal where you're not allowed to stop. So keep experimenting on stage. Your job is to try and make someone else in the quartet break up. Finally, Eddie's number 10. The audience wants to see the real you. So yes, go ahead, drop those trousers.
but don't.
Don't really.
All right, we asked Jake Tickner, face of the Newfangled 4, seen him practicing promptly answering emails on his invisible keyboard for a few suggestions. He hasn't responded though, leading us to believe that he is not funny at all, and it's all Joey. Thanks, Jake.
We also asked the great Roger Ross of Main Street fame. Roger has got the following wisdom to share.
What's happening?
That's great. Thanks, Rog. Another one of our really good mates, Jim Clark, we asked him for some advice. As the lead singer of Stormfront, Jim's a brilliant performer and a master of comedic timing. As the man responsible for some pretty side-splitting Barbershop moments, Jim says, number one, good comedy is really hard to perform well. And he also says, number two, good comedy is really time-consuming to develop.
Mm-hmm. Number three, non-comedy has a risk-reward limit. That is, you may not completely tank with non-comedy, but you can only get so much positive response with it as well. Comedy has nearly limitless risk-reward, meaning that positive response to comedy can go sky high, but a negative response is bottomless. Tip number 4 is to remember that the best comedy still makes sense. It has some sort of storyline or reason for happening, rather than just being random gags or jokes popping up in the midst of a song. That's a really important point. Number 5, Jim says knowing your audience is of paramount importance.
Number 6 is to meet expectations. We talked about this before. Then break expectations. Then meet them again, and then break them again. This is all about finding your character and playing your character relentlessly. But then stepping away from your character can be very, very funny. Finally, Jim reminds us that great comedy is nearly universal, and also that great comedy is nearly indefinable.
Although we have just spent trying to define it.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, there you have it, folks. We are just about to the end of our time together. We hope you've heard and seen some stuff that might inspire your own comedic journey. In the meantime, here's a summary of a few tips and tricks.
All right. So number 1, comedy needs to be funny. I don't know. This is actually something we need to say to a lot of the groups that we coach, and often we have to remind ourselves. It needs to be funny. It needs to have a punchline. General silliness can be entertaining amongst yourselves, but make sure you've got a punchline. Build up to something. Most importantly, like the result of tonight, talking about all of the different types of comedy that you can use, the different vehicles and tools. Make sure you understand the type of comedy that you're trying to deliver. Determine the methods and the techniques by which you can get the best effect on your audience.
You got to find your character and play your character relentlessly. So that's when you figure out who you are in the whole grand scheme of things and stick to it. Because then when you do break away from it, that's funny, as is the next point.
That's right.
Stepping away from your character can be funny. Look at that.
That's cool. It's like I read your mind.
It's like I read this earlier.
It's like you read the script.
And then we've got the rule of 3s. This is very helpful when trying to work out how many jokes or what to put in it and the timing of what you need to do, especially with a parody. And it ties in with the less is more kind of theory. Whereas, so you don't want to keep going down the road of adding another joke, because that just gets tiring and you lose the momentum of what you're trying to do. And always remember that you are not as funny as you think you are. Rehearsal funny is very different to stage funny, because in a rehearsal, you're with 3 other people that you've spent a lot of time with, and you've probably got a lot of in-jokes, and you're bored of each other, and so you come up with weird stuff. And you think that's funny, and then it's not. Like some of the things you may have seen tonight.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So we've got time for just one more quick clip that for us pretty much sums up our approach to comedy, and then we'll move on to answer any questions that you've asked throughout this. So here we go. Oh, yeah. That's funny though. That's funny.
Everyone, that's funny.
So we'll go back to this.
Whoa.
Whoa. Okay. Cool. So there we go. Now we'll jump down here. It looks like we've got a couple of questions. We'll just jump in there and have a look. Ash. Bit of advertising there, bloke.
I have a question here from Richard Reeve. He says, Ash, can you tell us something more about the podcast that was mentioned at the beginning of the show?
I think the answer is no. Okay.
No, we don't have time.
We've run out of time. Good. Okay. High five.
But if you do want to have a listen, it's called Good Morning. It's called Good Morning BHA, hosted by myself and Richard Reeve, and we talk about all things barbershop related to Australia and the world.
Very good. That's us, Trev.
Wow. Wasn't that something? Thanks, guys, for sharing some of your knowledge with us. It was, I guess, somewhat adequate. Just joking, guys. That was great. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who have joined the fun. Remember, folks, this session will be available shortly on the BHA YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and search Barbershop Harmony Australia, and you'll find a lot of our previous sessions there. Next week, we're excited to have a session on vocal health, how to look after your voices so that you can get the best out of your singing. Some tips and ideas about things you can do while you are still socially distanced from your real-life singing coach, and much more. Presented by the wonderfully talented Beck Hewitt. Make sure you tune in. Same time, same place. That's BHA Live every Friday night at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Spread the news. I've been your host, Trevor Brigger. Good night.